To start intermediate modeling with Blender, let's create a real-world object. I'm going to create this garlic press. This garlic press was designed by me a couple years ago, and it's fairly easy to model, and it will show you not only the basics of modeling, but we're going to introduce some of the advanced techniques as well. So let's start by opening a new project in Blender. File, New, load the startup file, and we're good. Before we start getting into the modeling, let's work on some terminology. First off, Blender uses what's called Blender units for measuring distance. For example, if I go to top-down mode, you can see this grid printed out here. I can zoom in just a tiny bit. Each one of these lines is one Blender unit. Now, in the real world, it really doesn't make a lot of difference. If I was to do modeling where I wanted to use real-world lighting and shading and maybe some objects that have to have a specific size to create shadows, then I can translate these Blender units into inches or millimeters. For the sake of 3D printing, you really don't have to worry about that because each one of these units can be represented as 1 millimeter, which most 3D printing software recognizes. So, that being said, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to hit Shift A. I'm going to add a circle. Now, I don't need the 3D manipulation tool here, so I'm going to turn that off. Now, when I just add the circle, the default size is 1 unit. We'll say that these are in millimeters. Now, I don't want something that's 1 millimeter in size. I want something much larger. Let's say the base of our garlic press is going to be 20 millimeters, which would mean my radius would have to be 10. Remember, it's a radius, so radius is from the center out. So from the distance here to here is now 20 millimeters. One thing I would recommend, if we hit the N key, there's an add-on to Blender that you can download that allows you to actually measure between objects and vertices. I have it installed here. It's called the Measure panel. I'm going to activate that, and it shows me the distance from the center of the object out to the edge, which is slightly larger than 10. If I go into Edit mode and I select 2 vertices, I can then update the selection and it will show me the distance between those 2 vertices, which is roughly 19.6 millimeter. So that's a nice tool to have when you're modeling for objects in the physical world. If you just go with the basic add a mesh and circle and start modeling it against that, you're going to have a garlic press the size of a thumbnail, which you don't want. That being said, I think these are my center ones. I'm going to make sure that that is close to 20, which at 19.9 is pretty close. So I'm going to turn that off so it's not in the way. I need to make a face because right now I just have a circle of vertices. So I'm going to select everything. I'm going to hit E to extrude and just hit Enter. What that does is that creates a duplicate set of vertices, which then I can create individual faces with. Now, I can do one of 2 things. I can hit S to scale them down and scale them so that they meet in the middle. And the problem with that is you still then have to merge all of these vertices together. So instead of doing that, one easy way is just to hit the W key and merge at center. And that merges all the vertices at the center of those vertices. So now I have nice little pie-shaped faces that I can work with. I'm going to go into wireframe mode. I'm going to grab this edge of the loop by hitting Alt Shift right click, and I'm going to hit E for extrude, and then I'm going to hit S to scale, and I'm going to bring that out about how thick we want the wall of our garlic press, which we will make roughly 1.25. And to get that exact, I can just type in 1.25 and hit Enter. So now we have a rough base here. So I'm going to hit Shift Alt right click to select those. I'm going to hit Shift and right click in the middle, select everything. Now we have to figure out how thick do we want to make the bottom. So I'm going to go into side view and I'm going to extrude upwards. Let's go up 2 millimeter. So we'll just type in 2. Hit Enter. And now we have the base. If I go into object mode, turn off wireframe, that's the base of our press. So now what we need to do, deselect everything by hitting A, select the inner ring and the outer ring. Let's move everything down. I'm going to hold shift and click the middle mouse wheel. That allows me to move anywhere in the space. I'm going to turn off perspective mode so I can see exactly what's going on here. And now, how tall do we want to make the press? So we're going to hit E to extrude and go up 40 millimeter. I'll type in 40 and hit enter. So this is now the cylinder to which you put your garlic into, and then we'll have a piston that comes down and presses them. When it presses it, garlic's got to go somewhere, right? So we're going to need some holes in the bottom so that the little bits of food come out. There's a really easy way to do that. I'm going to zoom in here, hit Shift C to center. If I go into edit mode, you can see that I can't really manipulate anything to create a nice even hole. I can't delete any faces or anything. If I delete a face, I'll have nice pie-shaped holes, which I do not want. What I want are nice round holes, evenly spaced all around. So to do that, I'm going to put my cursor at the center, right in the middle. We're going to make our first hole. I'm going to go into object mode. I'm going to hit Shift A and I'm going to add a cylinder. Now the default is 1 millimeter radius, which means the cylinder from side to side is 2 millimeter. We want our holes a little bit bigger. So I'm going to go hit Z to go into wireframe mode and hit 7 to look straight down upon it. Let's make these holes 3 millimeter big. So I'm going to type in 1.5 for the radius. It's probably a good size hole. Now, you're probably wondering, well, how do you get a hole from a cylinder? And it's easy. What I'm going to do is use that cylinder to create what's called a Boolean modifier. And a Boolean modifier allows you to merge objects together or use objects to create voids in other objects. And here's what I mean by that. I'm going to scale this up along the Z-axis so it's about that tall, just so it goes straight through the bottom of our press. And now, over here on the right, you have this little spanner icon. This is the modifiers section. There are several modifiers to choose from for doing modeling. The one I'm going to show you right now is called the Boolean modifier. I'm going to go to Boolean. Now, if I wanted to join these objects together, I would use an intersect, or I might use a union. And what that will do is that will make the small cylinder and the large one one object that's merged together. But we don't want that. What we want to do is we want to use the cylinder to create a void. So I'm going to choose difference. I'm going to actually back up a second. I'm going to select our main cylinder, add a Boolean, choose difference, and the object that's going to create that difference is the small cylinder, which is just named cylinder. So once you do that, you'll notice that it actually created a bit of a hole in the middle, which is exactly what we want. Now if I go into non-wireframe mode, you'll see that the cylinder's still there. So if I go up here, these little eyeball guys, and I turn off the cylinder, you can see now that I've just created a perfect hole right in the center. And that's how you use the Boolean modifier. So before we actually apply that, we just don't want one single hole. We want a whole little matrix of holes. So I'm going to go into wireframe mode again. Before I apply this, I'm going to bring back our cylinder, select that cylinder, and I'm going to, from the top view down, hit Shift D, and Shift D is for duplicate. So now I have two cylinders. So I'm going to hit Y, so it restricts it along the Y-axis, and we'll place one right about here. I can then just start duplicating them and placing them all over the place, but I want kind of a neat uniform look to it. So the thing I'm going to use for that is I'm going to use a spin modifier. Now I want to duplicate this object, but I want it to spin across the center of our model. So what I need to do is I need to move the origin of that cylinder, which is represented by this little dot here in the center, right there. I need to move that to the center so that when I spin it, it knows to spin around the center point. So I'm going to hit Shift S, make sure my cursor is in the center. Now I'm going to use a really weird key combination. I'm going to use Control, Shift, Alt, C. And that brings up another menu. And I'm going to choose origin to 3D cursor. And what that does is that moves that little center point right to where my cursor is. If I were to hit R for rotate, you can see it now rotates around the center as opposed to just spinning in place. So now, to spin, I'm going to go into edit mode, and I'm going to choose on the left the spin function. Now you'll notice that it created a bunch of duplicates all within like a little circle overlapping each other. And that's not actually what we want. So to modify the properties a bit, we first have to know how many duplicates do we want. Well, right now it defaults to 9. Let's cut that down a little bit to say 6. And then of course we want it to go all the way around. So I'm going to choose 360 degrees for the spin. And now you can see we have 6 uniformly spaced cylinders. When I did that, it actually duplicated the first one. And so now this first one actually has 2 of them. So if I select everything, hit W, and hit remove doubles, it should have removed 64 vertices, which was that little overlapping one on top of each other there. So now I'm going to go back into object mode, select my model. I'm going to apply the first Boolean, so that's that first hole in the center. I'm going to select Boolean Modifier again, and this time it's on our duplicate cylinder that we created, which is cylinder 001, and that's going to be difference. Now, here's a funny thing that happened. You'll notice that it actually wiped out the rest of our press, which is bad. And the reason it did that is because we had a problem with normals. So we'll go back. We can either fix that, or we can change this to intersect. So now, if I turn off the cylinder, go into wireframe mode, right, we should have holes evenly spaced. But then it covered up the one in the center. So let's look at something. Let's delete first cylinder. There we go. So it was actually the cylinder still in the center that was covering things up. Let's look at the top down. Very nice, very nice. I'm going to back up a second. I'm going to put that cylinder back because I want another outer ring along this outside. So I'm going to go into wireframe, hit Shift D to duplicate, move myself up the Y-axis. Now I want this to be spaced a little bit off, so instead of constricting myself along the Y, I'm going to kind of eyeball it here right in the center there. So it's evenly between these two. My cursor is still in the center, so I'm going to hit Control-Shift-Alt-C again and put my origin to the center. Go into edit mode and spin. So it has created 6 more. So I'm going to select everything, W, I'm going to remove the doubles because I know there was an extra one. I'm then going to go into object mode, I'm going to select my press, I'm going to apply that Boolean modifier, I'm going to add a new one for our new cylinders. This is going to be cylinder 2, and you can see it's made nice holes. Looks good, I'm going to apply that, and then all of these other cylinders we can now delete. So I'm going to select them, X to delete, X to delete, X to delete. Okay, let's look in non-wireframe mode how it looks. Beautiful, beautiful. Okay, now we need to move on to the next part. Let's put a top on it. I'm going to go into side viewed mode, turn off wireframe. Now it's kind of a little bit boring here. It's just straight up and down. So what I like to do, I'm going to go into edit mode, deselect what I've done before. I'm going to hit Shift Alt, right click. Oh, no, I want to grab that outer edge. I want to make that outer edge just a little bit bigger, just to give a bit of a taper. Yeah, like that. That's nice. Good. Okay. I'm going to deselect everything there. Now, I need to make a top to screw on to the top of this. Well, to do that, I need to make some threads to screw onto. So to do that, I'm going to use a new tool called the Screw Modifier. So I'm going to go into side view, turn off wireframe. Let's zoom in here. Let's grab a vertex right on the side here. Let's grab that one. What I need to do is make the contour of the thread. So to do that, I need to extrude this one vertex. We'll go out to about there. Now, let's talk about overhangs for a minute. When you're 3D printing on a conventional printer, it's going to start at the bottom here, and it's going to work up layer by layer by layer until we get to the point where it now has to print things that have a cavity underneath them, right? So what would happen, for example, let's say I extrude this and it came way out here. It had a top like that, right? Imagine that's the side shape of your object. Well, when your printer gets up here, it's going to actually want to come out here and start depositing plastic. Well, there's nothing for that plastic to rest on, so the plastic will just drip down and you'll have a horrible mess unless you use a lot of support material, which adds to your printing time. I'm going to get rid of that vertex and that vertex. We're going to work on a thread here. When you're modeling for 3D printing, you need to be mindful of your overhangs. How much of a cliff is this thing producing? If you do not want to waste a lot of plastic, or you have such a small space here to work in, not to have an overhang that hangs over more than 45 degrees. Most printers can handle 45 degrees without having plastic drooping all over the place. So we're going to make sure that line is pretty close to 45 degrees of an angle. Now I'm going to hit E to extrude again, and we're going to go 45 degrees again at the back angle, right about to where the first one is here. And if we wanted to line them up perfectly, I'd grab the first vertex. I'd go up here, and we'll look at the global coordinates. These are the coordinates X, Y, Z of where that vertex is in space. And you can see it's 10 millimeters off center in X, pretty much on center Y, and 42 millimeter off the ground Z. I'm going to copy the X by hitting Shift and just clicking. That selects it. I'm going to hit Control C to copy that, and I'm going to select the second vertex up here. You can see it's a little bit off, so I'm going to select that by hitting Shift, click, Control V to paste, hit Enter. You'll see that it shifted just slightly, but now they're lined up perfectly. Now, we need to make sure that this vertex is exactly 3 millimeters above this vertex. And to do that, I'm going to check my first vertex, which is 42 mil, and I'm going to make this one exactly 45. This makes sure that when we actually create the thread, that the bottom one and the top one line up perfectly. So now I'm going to select my thread. I'm going to hit P, and I'm going to separate by this selection. This makes it its own object. And now I can select that object, go to the modifier, and select screw. Now, screw is very similar to spin with a few new features. One, it allows us to make a spiral pattern with our spin. So the first thing I'm going to do is make sure the steps line up with our press, so that each one of these lines line up with these lines. And then over here at the screw function, I'm going to type in 3. That allows for these to meet perfectly. Now, how many threads do I want? I can just add them by increasing the iteration. So let's do 3. Now I'm going to apply that modifier. So this is now one mesh. Go into edit mode. Now when we actually screwed these, it made a duplicate all the way around, and when it met back at the start, these vertices right here are now overlapping. So if we select all, hit W and remove the doubles, these are now all one vertices each. So now I need to rejoin our thread back to the main model. I do that by selecting the first object, holding Shift, selecting the second, and hit Control J. If we look here, we now notice that we have a big gaping hole where the screw is. To fill this in, let's create a face here. I want to A, W, remove doubles. Okay, good. There we go. I want to create a face there. Now I'm going to select just the surrounding vertices using Shift Alt right click. I'm going to do the same with this ring, and I'm going to hit Alt F to fill in that gap really nicely. Very, very good. Okay. So now, to collapse in the top, I'm going to go into Side View. I'm into Edit Mode, deselect what we did before. This time I'm going to hit B. That allows me to drag a box and select vertices that way. And I'm going to hit Scale along the Z-axis 0. And what that does is that flattens down our model on the top. We're going to have to do a little bit of cleanup here, so no worries there. I want to select this outer ring. It may not let me do that automatically, so if I come here, hit C, and just select all of these, scale them down a little bit. This gets into a little bit of a manual step, is you might have to go through and clean up each one of these vertices by using the merge tool. At last, merge, at last, just so it's a nice clean face all the way around. Okay, now that these edges are all cleaned up, by the power of modern media, you didn't have to sit through all that, so I'm going to continue on. Now, one thing I noticed is that I have a little bit of a face problem here in the middle, so I'm going to go into my face select, hit C. I'm going to select all these faces that ended up right in the center. I'm going to get rid of those. So now you can see straight down to the bottom. Good. Go back into edit mode. So now we should have a nice screw cap to put on the top, which will be the next step. I'm going to go into side mode. I'm going to grab, say, this vertex right there. Now I'm going to hit E to extrude that out, and I'm going to go right out along the x-axis right to the edge. Doesn't have to be perfect. I'm going to then extrude up along Z and extrude again about 45 degrees to roughly about there. I'm going to select all of those new vertices I've just created, hit P to separate them out. Make sure we have a nice separation there. Good. My cursor's in the center. I'm going to select my object, hit 7 to look top down, and I'm going to go into edit mode and spin. I'm going to choose 32 steps. First selecting it, I'm going to hit spin, make sure 32 steps, 360 degrees, and now I have a lid. Haha. But it's not really a complete lid, so I'm going to grab that bottom vertice, this top vertice, hit F to make a face. In this case it's just two vertices, so it actually makes an edge. I'm going to hit Shift Alt right click on the top loop, shift right click on the bottom loop, hit Alt F, and it makes a bunch of faces. Now I don't want the ones on top. Actually I do. I want the ones on top because I need a top to my lid. I'm going to go into object mode. I'm just going to hide the bottom for a bit, and I'm going to look. Oh, look how nice that is. That's a nice lid. The only thing is we don't have any threads. So to do that we need another Boolean modifier. So let's hide that for a second. First thing we need to do here, go into edit mode, I'm going to check for non-manifolds, and I have quite a bit. That's fine, we'll clear that up. Let's create a face there. Select the top ring. Select the rest of my non-manifolds. Alt F to create faces. I'm going to go into face select mode. And I'm just going to select these top guys here. X to get rid of them. A little bit of cleaning up to do in here. And so, looks like we have a couple extra faces here. So I'm going to just take a step back here. Let's see how that face works. That ring. Bottom ring. Now let's make a face over here just in case. So what I'm trying to do is get it to the point where I don't have to manually create each one of those little surfaces. So if I hit C to select, if I hit my middle mouse button, I can actually deselect vertices, which is really nice. Oh, that's much better. That auto face worked much better. Let's see if we can do it on this side. Select non-manifold. Might have some duplicates here. Yeah. Okay, so I just needed to do a little bit of cleanup on my mesh here. So to not make you guys sit through that, I've gone ahead and cleaned up. I've gotten my threads to the point where they work. Now the one thing I need to check, I'm going to get rid of my lid for a second. I just want to check for non-manifold vertices, which I have none. As a matter of fact, I did have some, but I had to clean those up and I had to go through and find them. So now it's time to put threads in our lid so that the two go together. So we're going to bring back our lid. I'm going to go into object mode. I'm going to select my lid. I'm going to choose the Boolean modifier again, and I'm going to choose difference. And circle, which is the name of the base, is going to be the object that we're going to differ against. And you can see now that it's created the inside threads to our object. I'm going to apply that, and if we hide the base, you can now see that we have threads on the inside. Now the only thing I need to do here is go into edit mode, and I'm going to select all of my vertices, remove all my doubles. I'm going to select my outer ring. I'm going to select my inner ring. Let's turn off the faces for now. Alright, so now I've cleaned up a lot of those vertices, and now I should be able to select the inner ring, which is good. Select the outer ring, which is also good. Hit Alt F and create my faces to finish the solid object. And that concludes our lid. Now if we bring back the base and go to Z, we can see that the two pieces fit together nicely. Now one note with 3D printing before we finish up is that if you were to print something just like this, the tolerances or the spacing between the lid and the base would be so tight there's no space in between them, so you wouldn't be able to actually screw them together. It'd be very, very hard. So one thing I like to do is take one of the two, usually the outer one, so we'll take the lid, hit S to scale excluding the Z axis, and just scale it just a bit bigger, like that. That makes sure that the lid will screw very nicely onto the base and not jam up. So the last thing we need to do is just to check, make sure we have no non-manifold vertices, which we do. Just get those cleaned up, and we are done.